Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our fourth and final panel of the evening. We have some very big names with us today from both the centralized finance and decentralized finance world. And we'll be talking about the future of derivatives and kind of what our vision is and how we think, where we think they need to get to in that time. So I will hand over to Tamlyn, who will be chairing this panel, and then she will kind of lead you through the introductions and take you through everything, while I'll be hanging out backstage as usual. See you.
Thanks, Dagan. So I'm super excited about this panel. I have been for, 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whenever it was that I decided that this is what I want to talk about. And I'm really, really delighted to have these amazing panelists here today. So I'm working around my square box here. So in no particular order, we have Stani, who is the founder and CEO of Aave. Am I pronouncing Aave right? It's written and talked about everywhere, but just double checking. Who are doing incredible things in the decentralized space, finance space, hugely innovative and really pushing boundaries. We have David Nuelle. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly. Nuelle.
Actually, it's Nelly, like the rapper, but
Brilliant.
But any way you want to pronounce it is fine. So.
I don't want to pronounce it rapper.
Or rap it.
Right.
Nice. David is a industry veteran, Chicago trader of pushing 30 years, maybe longer. I don't want to presume, but super excited to have David join us and give us a real perspective. I'm sure David's seen a lot of changes in markets and in our conversations been super excited about sort of this innovation wave that we're seeing at the moment. And Mona Elisa, who is the founder of Avant-Garde Finance and the Melon Protocol, and a huge sort of really good friend of Vega. We're very interested in what Mona is doing in the decentralization of funds management space, and we are really looking at the moment on how we integrate that with Vega. And Mona has been a thought leader in the space for a long time. So I'm really excited to talk to you all. Just want to let everyone know that there may be a fourth panelist join us, Anton from Flovtech, who is a liquidity provider. He's, I think, struggling to get on technically, so sorry about that, but if he joins, we'll just loop him into the panel and the conversation at the time. So I've given like a very sort of my perspective, quick intro of you guys, but I'd love to hear a little bit more in your own voice about yourself. And I was thinking it'd be kind of cool to, in this panel, I really want to explore the future of financial markets, of derivatives, what happens when we, with all this sort of new tech and the ability to run things very, very differently, both in terms of governance and technology and movement of value and settlement and risk. What are the implications going forwards? Let's sort of daydream a bit, and we'll be looking forward. But I thought it'd be kind of fun to start with looking backwards and say, 10 years ago, what were you guys geeking out on? What were you thinking about? What was interesting you? I can certainly put my hand over my heart and say that I never in a million years back then thought I'd be geeking out over sort of market structures, microstructure, macrostructure, but I am, and I'm loving it. So yeah, over to you guys. We'll start. Shall I keep going around the square? So I'll start with you, Stani.
10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Well, 10 years ago, I think I was still a DJ who tried to get into law school in Finland, and but I finally made there. But still, I was actually doing quite early financial applications. So before law school, I actually did software development, more in mobile applications and Web 2 applications, and related to finance. I think one of my kind of goals was focus more on working capital finance and advancing payments for game developers and other pretty much kind of something like you could compare to invoice finance. So I did have like early early take on finance, and not much in the derivative space back then, but more for like debt, lending and borrowing. That has been always a bit even early something in my mind, and I wanted to work upon. Yeah, but in terms of like derivatives itself, I think the once I got more involved into the Ethereum and got involved to lending and borrowing on Ethereum, I started to notice like actually the power of derivatives when things started to get more tokenized, and whether it's basic interest bearing tokens that we have in Aave, or any kind of like derivatives that are built on top, and I think the space has been like pretty moving quite fast. So I would personally will not imagine anything like this happen. I was more towards the direction that we will make everything digital in one way, but I would not imagine that there will be a platform where everything is kind of like interoperable and permissionless. Because the cool part about this permissionless technology is not just that you can use permissionlessly different kinds of products and services built in one blockchain network, for example, but actually you could actually build those services and products. So it's a rare, like as a builder, it's kind of unique position where you can just do whatever there is in one particular blockchain network and try to combine different kinds of protocols and make financial products and create value for end users. And like the way I used to develop things is you first need a API key, you need to request a access and so forth, and especially if you're interacting with 2-3 different banks and try to combine something, you kind of need to obey their rules, their policies, get the access tokens, and it's more complex from the builder's perspective. So I'm pretty happy like where we are now, like looking back in the early years, and still I don't have that much experience. I mean, I've been in Ethereum like for three or so years, been building Web 2, but it's always been more of a hobby. And this Aave, and before we were Eatland, it started as a kind of like a community project and just escalated a bit. But I'm happy where things are going. There's still a lot of risk involved that should be handled some more diligent way, but yeah, it's been interesting.
Oh, it's super interesting to hear of your sort of I feel like you've sort of followed the technical innovation personally. Like you've been quite involved in Web 2 and then reached the limits of it and been sort of dug into the Web 3 stack. What about yourself, David?
Sure. So 10 years ago, I had no clue that any of this was anywhere near the horizon. I hadn't read the white paper. I was completely unfamiliar with Bitcoin. I'm not a programmer by trade, and I program lightly now at best. So the technical side was completely outside the realm of what I was focused on. It so happens that 10 years ago this week we launched a new initiative that was speeding up. We're basically in the arms race, the centralized derivatives arms race, as it were. And we had just implemented a bunch of FPGA solutions over a brand new line that became known as the spread line. And we were focused on making things faster. And so my role, I'd been working. I'd created a hedge fund, and we ran that successfully, and we got back into prop trading. So this was in a prop environment. So it was kind of something new and different. And so the twist of events that led me here is probably unlike anyone else, because number one, I'm a boomer, a bit of a dinosaur. I started trading in 1987 on the floor of the Mercantile Exchange. I would say I've always been interested in the technical side of what we were doing, but I had no clue on where it was going and where we are now. So
You will have seen a lot of change in the tech around markets, obviously, throughout your career. How do you sort of feel this compares? Do you get a nice tingly feeling about what's going on here? Are you skeptical?
Well, I think I would say this is very similar to the dawn of electronic trading, with the exception that it's kind of in an n-dimensional space, right? When we started my company in 1993, everyone was screaming and yelling in jackets on the CME and the CBOT and the Life, and I'd moved over to London, which is my tie to London, to trade on the Life, and so we were very early on in writing the gateways from the exchanges onto our platforms, and very early on in the trade algorithmic trading. At the time, and this will really date me, people said there was no way people were going to be able to trade an option on algorithmically. It wasn't going to be possible. Really? So I come from the perspective of rapid change, and that was originally the business that we started in London and ultimately sold. The business morphed quickly. I look at this space, and that was all about centralizing quickly, I suppose, right?
Right.
And I look at this space again, very similar, with a similar evolution in that there's a new paradigm shift, but it's the fact that things are not going to be deterministic, and you're going to have probabilistic outcomes and far more kind of different possibilities. So I look at this as a liberation in many ways. We have a kind of a tagline for ourselves internally of liberating transactions, for the way of the space. Yeah. And it's really true in so many ways. You're not caught in the web of spending more money, having to get with the protocols that are told to you, and you creating your own development within whatever protocol you want. So it's been an eye opener. It's quite an experience, and I'm excited where we are as well. So.
Oh, thank you. Super interesting. Mona, what about yourself?
Yeah, so 10 years ago, I was actually thinking about that, and it brought back a few memories. So I think there were two things I was kind of geeking out on / excited about. I was still working in traditional finance. I just moved almost exactly 10 years to the day. I moved to Switzerland and started working in a hedge fund after leaving nearly a decade on the trading floor with Goldman, and having lived through and traded 2008 financial crash. And I became a little bit, I went through, this really does sound geeky, but I went through a period of my life where I joined a book club, which focused on reading books about the economic crisis.
Oh, wow. There's a book club devoted to that theme.
Yeah, it was, I'm telling you, it was pretty geeky. But we, one of my motivations for that is working on the trading floor. I think you were working on a trading floor in 2008 as well, Tamlyn, so you probably remember. But in 2008, it was 2007, even the build up to it as well, and 8, and even the beginning of 9 was such a fascinating time. But being a trader, it also passed so fast. It just kind of passed in a flash, and it was like having front row seats to the most dramatic show ever, but also not really having time to absorb it because everything was moving so fast and so quickly, and you were the one making the market, so you didn't really have time to do anything else. And so I went through a phase of really geeking out on the exact details, replaying them, reading the juicy gossip and stories about what was happening in the Fed, who was meeting who, and loving kind of seeing names that I knew or people that I knew in some of these books or had seen, walking past me from time to time. And that was, that was one thing I was definitely geeking out on, apart from the actual investing, which of course I was still doing. And I also went through a phase, also about exactly 10 years ago, where I think, all the Syria stuff was kicking off, and it seems like an age ago now, but there was the whole influx of refugees into Europe was beginning for the first time, and I'd gone through this phase of trying to do charitable stuff, and in between my gardening leave, for example, I'd gone to volunteer for a charity in India, a microfinance charity, and I'd done a few other things in my free time before, and I never really was that convinced by the concept of charity once I'd actually done it. I mean, I was obsessed with it before, but once I'd actually experienced it, I was like, I don't really see how this empowers people. You're basically kind of teaching them to become dependent on donations. And I don't really get that as a business model. And what it actually, not a business model, but as a model, and I don't really understand how that's scalable and how it actually gets people ultimately out of this downward cycle. And so I started to become really interested in ways to help refugees that was more empowering. And I won't go into the details of it, but ultimately it was an interesting time for me, because I ended up being involved in efforts to help certain refugees, who kind of had entered Switzerland and had made it through somehow, and trying to, rather than just give them cash or give them, whatever, rather try to help them find opportunities to empower themselves. And so I think those were two things I was focused on. I also was totally not into Bitcoin, and maybe just a small funny story. My brother has worked at Google for a long time now, and I remember having a family dinner about 10 years ago, where over dinner he asked me, "So what do you think about Bitcoin?" And I said, "What's that?" And at which point my brother, who hated all bankers and finance people, started raging about how, you're so stupid, you guys work in finance and you don't even know what Bitcoin is, like you call yourself a finance person. And, so that was actually the first time I'd heard the word Bitcoin. And, I never really dug into it until a couple of years later, but it was, all of this stuff happened about 10 years ago. So
awesome, so interesting. I actually was born in sub-Saharan Africa. So I have also and spent some time there as a child, and I've also done some business there. And it's something I think a lot about, your comment about philanthropy, and what I think the way I look at things, and this is an idea I kind of want to run past you guys and see what you think. But like, I feel like a lot of philanthropy is about basically the fact that, at least in sub-Saharan Africa, the risk profile of people there, people running businesses, but individuals, is just completely different to my risk profile. So, the sense that, an extreme weather event, which sadly, obviously, with in the last sort of 10 years, we're seeing a lot more of, can, actually significantly sort of alter an entire family's, livelihood and futures, is something I'm sort of, it's like I'm very uncomfortable with it. And given that, like, I'm a professional in terms of unbundling, trading, swapping risk, I sort of feel like there's something that's got to be done there. And of course, I've seen like the emergence of, different microfinance, initiatives and other such things. And I guess I was just wondering, like, how you guys think, like, if we get to a point where we have this, much more global economies and much more ability to much more quickly, cheaply, and maybe more targetedly, I don't think that's a word, address people's direct risk needs, is that something you guys think is a way that markets might evolve? I'd just like to hear you guys' thoughts on it. It's something I think a lot about. I don't have like sort of concrete ideas of how it might all evolve, but yeah. Anyway,
I'll jump in and comment. So, centralized finance is about commoditization of risk, right? You've got to create in my mind. You've got to create, you've got to adhere to what the commodity rules are that apply to your particular risk needs. And they may not be perfect. I'll give you a great example. The CME tried to launch a while back a housing index across a wide variety of different different regions based on the commodity on the Schiller index, and basically failed, right, as far as I can tell, because it was way too specific to get a group of people to agree to the commodity, the commoditization of principle, basically. Now, I look at these markets. People talk about risk mitigation, and I'm thinking more about risk transference, right? For every, and in theory, for every risk you have, there's somebody else bears the other side of the risk, or has the benefit of the other side of the risk. So the question becomes, how do I price that value? What's that value? And what the promise of derivatives within this space is that you can specify risk and then price them based on individual needs. Now that's a lofty goal. That's very aspirational. Yeah. But the ability to have different oracles, the ability to have assets collateralized against risk, those are the kind of the building blocks of this. And and that's where I think that this will go, right? Where we go from less risk commoditization to more risk specialization and specification, and that's one of the things where I think I'm so hopeful that this would lead to broader and broader adoption. So that's kind of my initial.
That's super interesting. And just while I've got you, David, do you have any sort of examples of what you see in the world right now that you think it's like unhedged risk, but it just can't get hedged because there isn't a market there, or it's something people are just used to bearing potentially and don't realize that could be transferred, basically.
Sure. I mean, you could imagine house prices at a very specific level to become derivatives contracts, or building prices or anything. And who would write a contract, a price derivative on a commercial building? Well, before, it was very difficult to find the commodity that necessarily covered it. You'd have to search for the right index. It may not exist, may be very illiquid. There may be a large buyer willing, number of participants who are willing to write the contract on their home for whatever reason, and then embed it in some kind of contract, embedded in a smart contract, as long as it bears, some kind of revenue to them. I know for a fact that there are people who are looking at this particular kind of contract. So it becomes a future on a specific home price. That's just one concept, but you could extrapolate that out to millions of different scenarios, and that, the fact that you've got collateral to this, you've got potential oracles to this, it's really an imperfect solution today. But what's that going to look like in 2 or 3 years, right? So I think the move towards specification and specific instance is really going to be where the blockchain has the biggest benefits in terms of.
It's really, really interesting. What do you guys think?
That's a great point, which I'd never really thought of before, but it's very well articulated by David. And I think we're already seeing it, but I think, that the possibility now to just go onto an interface like Vega, be able to spin up any kind of contract, derivative, etc., in a matter of a few clicks, and hey, it's not the end of the world if no one takes the other side, but at least you've got your wish out there. You've put out your market, if you want, if you like, or your position, and you're looking for the other side, and there probably is someone in the other side of the world that might be looking for the exact opposite side of that trade, or that you can meet in the middle. So I think it's pretty fascinating that, it's a nice way to articulate it, that the blockchain empowers that kind of specialization of derivatives that may not make it to markets otherwise.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Someone earlier actually talked about like a sort of global RFQ market, and I really liked that. I was like, yeah, it's like people's sort of desires, and that global RFQ market, the way I see it, doesn't even need to be populated by a human. It can be something that gets detected as a need, as a risk need, by any of the kind of predictive sort of tech that's out there, or any of the sort of I don't know, any sort of tech that's looking at, say, a weather forecast and realizes that, you know, this human has an increased risk profile, or this business or whatever, and can actually sort of start to just on a much more efficient and shorter time scale, start to try and unpackage that risk and connect with people, like you say, Mona, who might be willing to take the other side of that. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, and the great part of it is you sort of really disrupt the layers of complexity that would typically lie within setting up a market like that. And I think I think empowering is a word I keep repeating, but I think it is really empowering that anyone can try to create, or a group of people who are all facing the same problem can try to create a market. And as long as the right price is found, there will always be someone probably willing to underwrite that risk, as long as as long as the risk reward is worth it.
Yeah, exactly.
I keep coming back to the Lloyd's of London model for insurance, right? And Lloyd's of London had built a great business around insurance because they were able to find, they had a pool of people, and I don't know that much about them, so that may be speaking, but my analysis is they had a pool of people who were willing to underwrite anything for a price, basically. And you would, if you couldn't insure something, you would go to Lloyd's of London, right? Well, now that was great if you're, insuring bridges or huge capital formation, but when does it get to the micro derivative level, right? When can individuals start to participate? And if they're willing to take some risk and get some kind of payout in it, you could imagine an enormous market for very bespoke things that you couldn't possibly list, right? And so the Lloyd's of London model is a bit of a kind of, I would call it a peer-to-peer kind of, no pun intended there, with the Lloyd's crowd. But there would be a model that would be potentially propagated on an electronic scale at a much smaller level to numerous people around the world. So I find it fascinating and very exciting. So
yeah, what do you think of all this, Stani? You're obviously very deep in the ideological space of this. Love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, for me, this is very, very fascinating. I like the kind of like the background on the Lloyd's of London, because it's kind of reminds a bit of decentralized finance in the way that now you have a lot of like very established financial markets, and on the other hand, you basically have now something very permissionless in sense that anyone can participate, create a market, and actually get insured and do that risk transfer. And I think it's very fascinating in the sense because there are a lot of people who are willing to take the risk, and they might have received gains from other risk transfers that they could actually take more risk and insure more things. And for me, that makes a lot of sense. And I think now, if ever, this is more important in the sense that I think like in terms of developing countries, but also in terms of technology, things are moving super fast. I mean, when we started to build our technology, it was so novel. So there wasn't that much of a, so for example, venture capital involved. So the risk was very high in that sense. And if you look further, I mean, the technology will just expand quite a lot. I mean, we will see a lot of examples where we might see, for example, some kind of like a credit default swaps or insurances or options in related to, for example, space flights and all the stuff that they are carrying with their rockets, for example, and the whole space there. And this is just one aspect of the tech and the innovation. I think there was going to be like many fields that are going to evolve, and somehow those risks needs to be transferred. The current markets are sophisticated in the sense that it's not always easy to participate in terms of like globally and in permissionless fashion. And I personally would love to. Maybe I have like a weird perspective, but I love to do my financial decisions by myself. I like to decide how much I save. I don't like to. I mean, I'm risk aware in the sense that I kind of understand risks. I definitely I'm okay to disclaimers and so forth. I mean, but I would like to decide where I invest and how much I have upside and downside. And I think there's many other people like me out there that kind of like don't want to be limited in that sense. And I think definitely we'll see some related. And in terms of like derivatives itself, like in tokenization, it really allows quite interesting access, because let's say if you're basically having a weather derivatives or related to crops and let's say the agriculture industry, you can actually build applications on top where if you're buying, for example, seeds, you are basically putting options and other derivatives on that. And that's just one, like the classical farmer example. It fits very well now in the DeFi space with all the yield farming. But I think what's interesting here is that it's just a good sample. Like there's just one interesting place where you could actually achieve this permissionless chain. But there's plenty of other things, and especially if you're you can also work with oracles and permissionless kind of like a dispute resolution and whatnot. I mean, that will be a game changer, and we're not far away from that. I think we're thinking that it's going to happen in a few years from now. I think it will happen sooner or later, maybe even like the next 6-12 months.
What exactly do you think will happen?
I think there will be a lot of derivative markets. I think.
All right, I see. Yeah. I mean, a few things you said that I'm keen to pick up on, but I pester the engineers on the Vega team all the time. I'm like, but hang on, like the Internet of Things is this like global kind of Oracle data source, right? And I think there's still a whole bunch of problems with security, obviously, and so you know that we've still got probably a ways to go. But once you know, sort of a bunch of those problems are solved, we start to get some really interesting kind of use cases where you know, really, you know, you can get ephemeral markets that spin up based off particular triggers. You get, you know, contracts that get entered into, exited into, you know, and there's can be this entire sort of risk management layer almost that happens. And at the moment, I would say quite a lot of it, despite, you know, the rise of algorithmic and HFT trading, but I would say like generally in terms of risk management on the planet, there's, you know, quite a lot is done, you know, manually through human intervention. And yeah, I sort of daydream about that, but then yeah, the engineers tell me that, you know, we've still got some security things to figure out with IoT, and that makes a lot of sense. I traded a weather derivative, actually many weather derivatives for power markets, but it was always really fascinating to think, you know, there's this weather station, and if a cloud comes over, that's going to have a like multi-million-dollar effect on whether this triggers or not. And, you know, like you're tempted to go out and get the hairdryer, and, you know, obviously I didn't do that. But yeah, it's sort of interesting to think about how the world might look in 10 years' time. And actually, I had a question for you guys. Like, you know, thinking about all that, and then of course all of the adjacent, you know, sort of tech that's evolving around, you know, predictive AI stuff, and you know, probably stuff you guys know better than I do. Like, what's sort of the craziest derivatives or financial market that you guys could dream up that might be looking forward 10 years, might be in action, useful to humans or the environment or whatever?
I can kick off. It's a mouthful, so I'm going to say it twice.
Okay.
And then probably someone will need to translate it. But I'm thinking, so this is crazy, but we're starting. I'm very happy to see for the first time, really, in since DeFi, became a thing, we're starting to see insurance in DeFi, which is a really nice and good thing. And it's impossible for DeFi to scale without proper viable insurance solutions, because you do have the smart contract risk. Ultimately, it's the elephant in the room. Sure, your returns are great and you can create a lot of complex and beautiful products, but ultimately, if the technology fails, it's all gone. So insurance, I believe, is really pivotal to the growth of DeFi. And, whether that's asset management or lending, borrowing, or, options derivatives. And I think, the natural evolution of that is that ultimately people will start trading the second derivatives of what we're building now 10 years from now. And I can see this is crazy and this is probably not that original, but variance swap on smart contract insurance derivatives 10 years from now will probably be a thing.
Very nice.
So essentially trading the underlying volatility on smart contract insurance derivatives.
Interesting. I like it. I've not ever thought of that one. I do like a good variance swap there.
You sound like you're more in the AI kind of.
Oh, I'm really not. I'm just curious about probably a whole bunch of stuff I don't fully understand. That's super interesting. And I think that kind of touches on what I'm saying, whereas it's, there's this kind of, this like sort of interconnected on-chain data that's being produced and has very real kind of implications for people's risk profiles. And then, then obviously building derivatives on top of that makes a lot of sense. What do you think, David?
This is a really difficult question because there's so many strange, but I think, in general, derivatives are related to tangible things, right? And I mean, you've got metrics that are tangible, and I wonder if there's a derivative that could be that to try to measure something that's difficult to quantify, right? And intangible. And so, for instance, could there be a derivative on happiness? Right.
I was literally, you read my mind when you said that. I thought a happiness index, amazing.
Right, and people have talked about the world GDP is measured improperly, right, and that somehow happiness is a bigger component. I mean, they talk about the Nepal having the highest GDP in the world if you base it on happiness or something.
Wow.
And so now if you had a way to if you had a number of oracles that could measure what happiness meant, and then you could put it into some kind of metric, and in other words, something that was unquantifiable before, then you may have something that would be a derivative on something that wasn't on an intangible. Now, and it sounds a little bit insane, but then if, for instance, there were a derivative on happiness, could someone make somebody happier and hence take delivery on that derivative or something, right? So it could get, and
well,
that's where it gets a little bit hazy for me. But
it's a little interesting. I guess the connection there would be, does money make you happy? Because if you hedge, like for example, the classic example of this is you're watching your favorite sporting team and you bet against them winning, so that if they lose, you have a emotional hedge, right? And is that effective? I have no idea.
And who knows, right? And anyway, so I found that kind of an interest. I've seen a little bit of writing on people discussing it, and I think it's an interesting train of thought that could yield something down the road. So
yeah, I love that. It's definitely like something I've sort of looked at in the last sort of 4 or 5 years. Just out of sort of personal interest, is obviously we're collecting so much more digital data on humans, and there's sort of like a sort of almost global behavioral science growth of understanding of humans, because we're capturing so much digital data basically. And that really, really fascinates me. And I think the ability to understand that a human is happy and like be able to do that on a very sort of live basis, or even a society, or like understand sort of the risks that are coming to those humans or whatever. I think that there is definitely something in that. I could see that within 10 years, there are markets around that. So yeah, I really like that. I think that's really interesting. What about yourself, Stani?
Yeah, I was thinking about this happiness thing because it's kind of like it's difficult to. I mean, because one thing is that I come from Finland, and I get it often that when I said that I come from Finland, that I know Finland, that I read that it's the happiest country in the world, and that was based on a some sort of article, or like some kind of like a polling or measurement that was done. I don't know exactly, but that's exactly what you could actually do. And I really find it somehow like very interesting. But in terms of like how things will look like in the future, I think many things will be relying upon the data. My kind of concern now is the getting that data into blockchain is a bit expensive at the moment in Ethereum. Okay. But I could imagine like if some of the derivative trading and kind of like a settlement events could go into layer 2, that would be pretty fascinating, because you could push a lot of data inside, and then you're gonna have the derivatives contract, and then you can settle there. And if you want actually to somehow finalize your settlement with more security, you can then go back to Ethereum actually and have the bigger security. So I think one important point is that when we are going towards the scalability and layer 2 stuff, then I think we'll see like more data. And when we get more data into the on-chain, that will be very fascinating. Then I think that people start to realize what kind of stuff you could actually do, and what kind of contracts you could actually conclude and trade them in aftermarkets, and that is like the big thing I think that we need now. And the layer 2 stuff, I think people are now pushing it quite a lot. I mean, the gas price, I remember like was it a week ago or something, like 500 above, and that's a bit insane for thinking of permissionless idea and everyone can access.
Yeah, it doesn't become everyone can access it anymore, does it? Only the whales survive. Yeah, very, very interesting. I think, on one of our earlier panels, Barney asked his panel, like, kind of what's the sort of ultimate? And then he said that his ultimate was like that you can, get leveraged trading on pretty much any asset on the planet, in a decentralized setting. And I just wondered if you guys, like, what would be like, not just like what you think will happen, but almost like what you want to happen? Like what is good look like for, the global markets and economy, and what would make you sleep better at night and happier? And I'll make this our last question actually, and throw out to the community watching, see if they've got any questions. Please pop some in the chat while these guys give us a brief couple of lines on
not too far away from where Barney is, actually. I think that would make me very happy too. I think it's the underlying assumption, but it's definitely the underlying assumption I had 5 years ago when we set out to start building Melon.
Right.
And it's been a little bit slow getting there. I think partly because of some of the reasons Stani just mentioned, and partly for other reasons. But I'm also, I'm in full agreement with Stani that as applications move more and more to layer 2 solutions, it becomes much easier to have data on chain. It becomes easier and cheaper to have data on chain. Then you also are able to incorporate a lot more in assets, in liquidity, in
Sure.
strategies and products, and yeah. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. You guys want to add any thoughts to that?
I've got to say that your question about what product would immediately make me happier is stumping me a little bit. That's one. Right. And it's maybe it's because there are so many products. I think I wish there were an option product that were fully decentralized on say indices in the United States, for instance, that were fully liquid, right? And so that just as an immediate thought, that's the one that pops in my head. I think I don't think we're very far from that. I think we're probably less than a year from something really working out. There's so many initiatives in this space, but I think those will be the ones that kind of start to bridge the gap between this kind of netherworld that we were talking about and kind of where we are today. So.
Yeah, interesting. And so it's really about bringing the sort of traditional markets, but expanding them, like growing that pie, basically, or like sort of expanding access across the breadth of indices, or is it?
It's about. I think that there's a gap of understanding between kind of the real world, conventional world, and the people who are focused on this space. And something's got to be the gap that kind of brings them together, right? Or the bridge that brings them together.
Yeah.
And my initial thinking is the power of you don't want to give people too much too quickly. But the power of an Ethereum based, something that's why I was so impressed with Vega, because what it looks like in so many ways is what we see, but it's such a bridge to what is possible. And so one of the things when I looked at your demo and I was, that to me was what got me excited about the project. And so we're just not there yet. As you're talking about we need level 2 protocols, and we need other things. But so when I think about what gets me excited, it's what gets us over that bridge, is what I would say.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's about actually decentralizing sort of real world finance and use cases, and like you say, have that bridge. And I think what obviously is super important for that is the evolution of the space in general, like the wallet providers and the UX and all the sort of and Oracle providers, as we touched on, all the adjacent sort of basically all the necessary ingredients for people to be able to actually put a trade on, so that you can have your mate who isn't a crypto enthusiast be able to just go, all right, I can get exposure to this and I can include this in my portfolio. And I'm very passionate about that as well. And like you say, I think that's what we've sort of had our hearts set on right from the start with Vega, and hoping to pull off. I feel we have kind of almost there. Stani, what about your thoughts?
I'm just reading the stuff here. Derivatives for fear and greed, measuring emotions with textual analysis. Like there's pretty cool things that you could actually
absolutely
you could actually do. Yeah, I mean it's kind of like it's getting quite interesting in the space in general. I think like even though like there's like a lot of opportunity, I'm still like wondering like how this whole thing can scale. I mean, we're actually like in Aave, we're not doing derivatives that much in terms of we do have interest bearing tokens which are kind of derivatives, but I'm just thinking like what it takes like for institutionals to see, like, because the way I see, like, I see value added as kind of like a new consumers in terms of who could consume derivatives, but also traders participating in new opportunities. But maybe it's like more of a question for you, in the sense that, like, how, like, what it takes for institutions to actually start getting more involved and interested in the derivatives in general, and see opportunities. I mean, what's the kind of like a bottleneck at the moment?
I mean, I think David's probably best placed to answer that. But do you mean just to be clear, do you mean sort of generally in crypto, or do you mean in decentralized finance?
Yeah, I mean, I know that kind of like there is some institutionals in DeFi, but what it takes to actually, like, people to understand and the opportunities, and also kind of like shield them a bit in the in the institutional side, because I remember when blockchain was a thing in 2016, 17, and the value proposition was quite big, and institutions were talking about it, and there wasn't any infrastructure, any applications that much. But now we have DeFi, we kind of understand the opportunities, but what it takes the institutionals to basically talk about these opportunities and build bridges.
Well, I think there are a lot of institutions that are trying to put their toe in the water, but afraid to go in the deep end at this end. And well, I think the biggest issue for most institutions, and speaking, is really making sure there's proper KYC AML that's been done, and that's obviously one of the issues around the DeFi space. How do you ensure that? And I think a solution. Such a solution will be necessary before institutions get in any big way. My personal feeling. Now, Ethereum has got some interesting things that they've worked on in that, and I think there are some other protocols, like I look at Civic. I don't know if you have ever seen that, but that's kind of that has real possibilities for being something like a digital passport or something. I'm mentioning that without having but I think that's from my perspective, and from with whom I speak, those are the biggest hurdles that for institutions kind of getting in.
It's really interesting. I mean, we really need to wrap up really soon. I just saw the time, and you need to jump on another call, David. But in terms of sort of the way, the assumptions that underpin KYC AML and sort of people's identity and their permission to trade, I'm very, very curious to see, maybe more in the 20 to 30 year timeframe, like how that looks. Like, do people build up actually an on-chain identity and proof of citizenship and good behavior and so forth? Yeah, something I muse about. I don't know if anyone else does.
Yeah, I know what you mean. If it's not done properly, then it could actually end up having the absolute extreme opposite effect of what was initially intended with the whole blockchain movement. But yeah, it will be interesting to see.
Yeah. Well, guys, I think we have to wrap up. I'm really sorry this went so much faster than I thought. I really, really enjoyed talking to you guys so much. We do have some questions that are unanswered, but we do have some community Discord, so I might just transfer them over and send you guys a link, and if you'd like to help answer those, that would be great. Cool. Thank you so much for your time. I know you all super busy people building out this revolution, and knee deep in sort of trading and markets. And yeah, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with our community. And thank you.
Thanks, Tamlyn. Great being here.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for coming. So we're going to take a few minutes, and then Christina and I will wrap up the entire day and just go over what we've talked about and just how to follow up. And then that will be the end of our very long a series of panels, discussions, AMAs, demos, and everything else in between. Thank you all for sticking around if you've been here since the beginning, and thanks for tuning in if you've just joined. Thanks for everything, and yeah, I'll catch you guys in a couple of minutes. Bye.
Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.